Thank you, Fran. This is my last introduction, and it's a great pleasure to go out on a high note. This is an incredibly important topic. Like ornithology and astronomy and herpetology, archaeology is a discipline that's had a long history of collaboration between those who make their living doing archaeology and those people who make their living doing other things but have a deep and abiding passion for archaeology. The Arizona Archaeological and Historical Society, for example, has been going for over 100 years. This collaboration has been very productive in the past and has an enormous potential for being even more productive in the future for understanding and deepening our understanding of our shared humanity. Tonight's primary speaker, is Steve Tomka. Received his PhD from the University of Texas at Austin, and he did his early research in the Andean area. For most of his career, however, he's been doing Texas archaeology, and things like that little-known place as the Alamo is one of the projects. He, for nearly 20 years, was director of the Center for Archaeological Research at the University of Texas at San Antonio, and currently is the director of cultural resource programs for the Rabba Kistner firm in San Antonio. He was elected to the board of directors of the Society for American Archaeology and has served on many, many boards in Texas dealing with prehistory and cultural heritage. He received the Jimmy L. Mitchell Award for Outstanding Contributions in South Texas Archaeology. And so it's a great pleasure, and I hope you join me in welcoming Steve for this very, very important talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate the introduction. It makes me feel a little bit old. I didn't realize I was involved in so many things, but time flies, and so here we are. Just a few years really before I kind of knock on the door of retirement, probably. So it is a great pleasure to be with you all. I am especially pleased to be able to speak to you about the relationship between professional and avocational archaeologists, in part because I've been on all sides of the ledger, basically, and have dwelt in both worlds, and I've enjoyed both and learned an immense amount from both. And one of the things that has happened in the last couple of years is I've been elected as the chair of the Council of Allied Societies. And one of the people that I've learned immensely from is our vice chair, Jay Smith, who is joining me and will be joining us in the discussion or answer session later on. Jay has been really the dynamo behind what we've been able to accomplish in the last 2.5 years. We have about 6 to 8 more months to go before I step down. I'm not sure what her plans are. I think she has to step down as well as a 3-year appointment. But she has been an immensely powerful person that has a lot of energy, that is dedicated towards the cause of highlighting the role of avocational members in the Society for American Archaeology and in general as well. So I am very, very pleased to have her besides me today and to be part of this as we move forward. Jay, would you like to say hi?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Pleased to be with ArcandHIS again. Have very fond memories of my term on the board with ArcandHIS, and really appreciate this opportunity to bring you a little more information about what the Council of Allied Society's goals and plans are, as well as to encourage you to get more engaged with us. So thank you again for having us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, it's a pleasure to be here. It is it's just really a fun topic, and a topic that both Jay and I believe strongly in, as does Andrew Gord, who is our secretary. You know, we've all come out of backgrounds that I think are avocational in some way. I think the love of archaeology, the love of prehistory, the love of our heritage and understanding our heritage is common to all of us. And I think that's what drove me when I was asked by Pat Gilman several years ago to basically take her spot when she was coming off as the chair to work on the organization with the organization. And so I accepted happily because I really do believe deep down that it's a hugely important organization that is the council is, and the goals and aspirations that we have are extremely important for the future of archaeology, they say, as we move forward. So let's get started. What I would like to do is just provide a roadmap of where we're going with the presentation. And with any luck, we'll finish in 45 minutes. But the roadmap basically starts with us providing a brief introduction to what the Council of Affiliated Societies is. We also want to discuss a little bit, sort of a definitional matter, which is what is an avocational archaeologist? How does it fit into the big picture? And also point out the important legacies of avocational archaeologists, some of the groundbreakers going back to the 40s and 60s that really just are giants in archaeology and have been in archaeology for decades now. We also want to talk about state archaeological societies, which are really, really critical to what the health of the organization and avocational societies, and really also the Society for American Archaeology is about. We want to talk about some of the modern citizen scientists who have contributed and are continuing to contribute immensely to the moving forward of archaeology. And I also wanted to mention that as I move forward with the presentation, here and there, I will throw in images of artifacts, and it's the intent is not to make this an artifact show, but really to show that many of these artifact collections that I will be showing, and many of the things that we've learned about these artifact collections, which come from the borderlands between Mexico and Texas and the coastal plains of Texas and the Gulf Coast, were collected back in the 30s and 40s. And without those collections nowadays, we wouldn't have the archaeological record that we have. And some of those individuals who collected these drew maps and kept records that are impeccable even today by today's standards. And so I will be showing those artifacts, throwing in an anecdote here and there about them, just to point out the fact that some of these materials and the contributions are immensely important as archaeology developed in the state of Texas in particular. So beyond that, then we will talk about broadening opportunities as we come out of the 60s and 70s for collaboration and cooperation between archaeologists, both professional and avocational archaeologists, how the state agencies, various state agencies, and cultural resource management has contributed to this newfound life, if you will, new set of opportunities that exist out there for collaboration between us. And then talk a little bit about how we can grow and develop and build on the foundations that we have built over the last 40, 50, 60 years, and even earlier than that, longer than that. So let's get started. Basically, with a brief description of what COAS is about. It's basically an organization, the Council of Allied Societies, that exists to advocate for collaborative efforts between professional and avocational archaeologists. We want to shine a light on really the potential of what we can do as a group and as a collaboration, rather than each of us working in our own corners. There has been, the foundation has been there, the cooperations have been there for years and years and years, and it's a matter of strengthening those collaborations and cooperations. And so we are here to build a community of like-minded individuals, really, that are preaching to the choir, so to say, are emphasizing the fact that together we make a stronger team, and we're all on the same team to really educate and preserve the heritage and advocate for the heritage of our people, whether that be Native Americans, our history, our heritage, whether we be Czechs or Hungarians, such as myself, or any other nationality, any other cloth of human being, basically. We are here to understand ourselves. We are here to sort of understand where we come from and how we've got where we are and how we're going to fumble forward. And I think all of us, because that desire holds us together. All of us are interested in the same things, and all of us have a lot to contribute individually and as groups to telling the story of what we're all about and finding out what we are all about through history and prehistory. Whoops. So at the present time, I was shocked, to be honest. In April, we had the SAA meetings. And at the time, we counted, I think, 13 organizations as part of the COAS. And just, I've been seeing emails from Jay about a new society joining us almost every week, it seems like, since the SAAs. And sure enough, when I finally was putting together the presentation, I noticed that there are now 23 societies, archaeological societies from across the country that have joined the council, and that is wonderful. The record number of societies that we've had dates back to 1991, I believe. Only a few years, 2007. Only a few years after the council was organized in 1991, and so we are just about equal to that number. And when I initially joined the organization, I thought we'd be lucky if we get upwhere in the low 20s, but it looks like the interest has grown immensely, especially in the last 6-8 months, and we're hoping that it will continue growing, and before too long, it will take 2 or 3 slides to put everybody on a slide. And I apologize if you're counting the number of logos. I only could grab, I want to say, about 16 or 17 of them. The others were beyond my capacity to steal the logos and put on this slide. Otherwise, I would have. So I apologize for those of you that are not shown on here, but there are a total of 23 organizations that are members of COAS as of now. So going on to the avocational archaeologists, which is what Paul mentioned in his introduction, and what sort of is the crux of the issue here. It's one of those things where there is, frankly, sort of a slight division between professional archaeologists and avocational archaeologists. That's a matter of well, we're better educated than you are. And I think that's not really the way to look at this at all. It's not about education. It's about love of the field. It's about dedication and effort and passion, true passion for learning and wanting to learn about what we're about. And so I think when we look at what distinguishes avocational archaeologists from professional archaeologists, one of the easy measures, if you will, is to say that, well, professional archaeologists are those that get paid for their efforts, and avocational archaeologists are those that do not. And I think that's a simple measure, but again, it's less important than realizing that really the bond that holds us together is that passion for that common passion that we share, whether we're professionals or avocationals, for learning about ourselves and learning about our heritage. And so when it comes to the avocational archaeologists, really the important thing to realize is that it cuts across all aspects of life, all genders, all ages, all, everything. It's the grandparents who have kids who take them to field schools during the summer. It's the retired professional who has taken a job as an engineer or as a construction manager, or you name it, but who has always wanted to become an archaeologist. And every weekend when he heard or she heard about an archaeological field school, she or he wanted to be part of that field school. It's that passion and that interest, that innate interest that really burns in many of the avocational individuals to put your hands on an artifact, for instance, that is 3, 4, 5,000 years old, and more importantly, to understand where it comes from, how it got there, how it was made. I think that passion and that sort of search for knowledge is what really is all about, and what avocationalists have in common with every professional in the field today. And so that's what's really cool, and that's what really we all have to understand as archaeologists, whether we're professional, whether we're members of SA or members of the Texas Archaeological Society or Maryland Archaeological Society. The important thing is that there is a passion that nobody can hold back, that really will keep us moving forward, searching for new bits of information, new artifacts that tell us a story about the past. So that's, to me, is really what is at the center of being an avocational archaeologist. It's a calling to learn, just like it's a calling to learn for professional archaeologists, professors who teach at the university level, or CRM archaeologists, who are out there digging in the hot sun in the middle of Arizona. All of us share that really love for and thirst for knowledge. So going back to these artifacts here, what is interesting about these is that they are arrow points that came out of sand dune sites on the coast of Texas. They were probably made of bottles that came off of shipwrecks, Spanish and English, in the 1500s. They took those bottle bases, made projectile points out of them. The projectile points replicate prehistoric forms, and therefore we are able to tell that the prehistoric components, the prehistoric people that made those projectile points early on, continue to make them into historic times. In our case, in Texas, historic times being roughly around 1677, 1680 or thereabouts. And then as you moved into the missions, and also pre-mission, as the indigenous population was getting hold of metal, they started making the same projectile points out of metal. Unfortunately, the metal wasn't as pliable and as easily workable because the metalworking tools were simply not in the possession of the indigenous population. So the same forms are not necessarily replicated in metal arrow tips as they are in glass, but nonetheless, it kind of shows the transition shows that evolution of the technology of arrow point making, of hunting gear making, with the appearance of new metal artifacts or new raw materials, I should say, for making projectile points. Now, when we talk about sort of the giants and the early days of avocational archaeologists, we can go back into the 30s and 40s and realize that individuals who really became giants in archaeology in the 60s and 70s, such as George Fridson, started out as basically a ranch hand on his family's ranch. And then, his interests took him into sort of wandering the deserts and the Wyoming Badlands and looking for artifacts, and eventually becoming involved with and exposed to paleontologists who were working near his family ranch. And that led him into interest in archaeology and paleontology. And eventually, when he finally graduated from high school and came back from the war, he joined the Archaeological Society, Wyoming Archaeological Society, and really worked as an avocational person, avocational archaeologist for 20 years. and only, realized as he had those exposures and he interacted with faculty that really the contributions that he wanted to make could only come about, in his case back in those days, if he sought out a degree in archaeology, and he eventually did that. But even without it, he probably knew as much as most archaeologists, and certainly more than most archaeologists, about practices such as hunting, big game hunting in particular. And so it was his desire to learn, as well as his sense that he could contribute to the field of archaeology as an archaeologist, as a professional archaeologist, that really contributed to him seeking out degrees. And in '68, he was named as the first state archaeologist in Wyoming. And then eventually in 2005, of course, he was given or awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society for American Archaeology. And so in his case, here's an individual who is as far away from the world of archaeology as you can get as a high school student, but he's interested in archaeology, is driven towards it, and eventually feels that he has a contribution to make in archaeology, and pursues it and becomes, one of the most respected archaeologists out there, dealing with Paleo-Indian materials in particular, and hunting, prehistoric hunting practices specifically. And so, you never know what gets you started and where it leads, but it could be something totally removed from archaeology, but the passion is there to lead you towards archaeology. Another individual similar to that is called Chapman, who was a teacher of mine at the University of Missouri in the 80s. Carl, again, started out like George as a teenager. Basically, he was so interested in archaeology that he organized, as 14, 15, 16-year-old, organized his own little survey of Crawford County, where he grew up, looking for archaeological sites. Wow, that's pretty amazing. As a 14-year-old, I wasn't interested in that, believe me. But the important thing is that his passion was so strong that one of the history professors at the University of Missouri, Jesse Wench, noted the fact that this little teenager has a lot of interest and a burning passion for this. So he actually lent him money to enroll at the University of Missouri and study formally to become an archaeologist, anthropologist. And he later on, by the time he passed away during a car accident in '87, he was thought of as the dean of Missouri archaeology. Again, it's amazing, and for many, I know of many individuals that are now retiring faculty members who tell us in stories over campfires at field schools that, hey, yeah, I was a teenager, I was a 15, 16, 17-year-old when I first found my arrow point, and ever since then, I knew I was going to be an archaeologist. And again, it's that commonality of passion and desire that really holds, probably every one of us, or is true for every one of us. Another person that's that way, people in Arkansas recognize Esther Davis's name. She was a giant in archaeological circles and at the University of Arkansas. She began early in as a paid staff member on the Upper Gila expedition project run by Bob McGinsey. He recognized, as in the case of Carl, the potential of the person, not as a field person, so much as an organizer and cataloger and with good detail orientation. And so when he got to Arkansas, he asked her to come and join him at the museum, Arkansas Museum, that he basically approached the legislature to found in Arkansas because of the huge amount of WPA, Works Progress Administration, artifact collections that Arkansas has acquired back in the 30s. And so she arrived he gave her basically an opportunity to shine and to excel, and the rest is history, as they say. You know, she just had an immense impression on archaeologists. She organized, was active in organizing all the avocational archaeologists into a cohesive group. Arkansas was one of the trailblazers in putting together a training program for avocational archaeologists that is still in existence today, and it is still the standard by which most new states that are working on avocational training programs measure themselves. It's just an amazing story. You know, and she was one that started in the 50s, back in the day when, you know, women were not supposed to have been, you know, out in the field with male crews, and she wasn't digging, but she was out there contributing in her own strengths, to her own strengths. Another person, and it's not on my slideshow, but comes to mind, and I have to mention, is Dr. Deanne Story, who passed away a few years ago. She was the same way. In the 50s, she was out there actually digging with male colleagues, and in many ways out digging them, and eventually got a master's and a PhD at the University of at UT, working with adjuncts, you know, and under adjuncts. And so it's amazing again that some of the people that were drawn to the field, some of the women that were drawn to the field were so powerful and so strong that they were able to forge forward in a male-dominated society back in the 50s to make a career, to become some of the first state archaeologists, to become the first really female anthropologists hired at UT back in 1950 or 56 or something like that. And so again, it's just the contributions of these avocational people that started out as avocationals, 16, 15, 20 years old avocationals, and eventually led their careers, their passion led them to be in those positions, to move forward in a society. It's just amazingly important to me. And it's just, there's nothing more pleasing than to see that kind of contribution that avocational archaeologists and the love of the field can drive you to have. Now, the role of archaeological societies, state archaeological societies, is very, very important in this evolution of avocational societies and avocational membership. As Paul mentioned, you know, the AAHS is you know, over 100 years old. As I was looking at sort of the web pages of various other avocational or state archaeological societies, there are many of them that are 60, 70, 80 years old that have had continuous membership since the beginning and are still flourishing today. And to me, they are flourishing and are proof of the fact that, you know, archaeology is important. Archaeology outside of the History Channel is important. Archaeology, you know, the love of archaeology, interest in archaeology comes from that passion of knowing where you come from, and that will never go away. And that's what drives people towards joining these societies, to learn about them, to learn about their own heritage. And as it happens, it in many states, the archaeological societies, by their nature, were an animal of complexity, where professional and avocational archaeologists work side by side. Texas is one of those states where, from the days Mott Davis, Esther Davis's older brother, came to the state and worked as an archaeologist, he was very much in favor of bringing together professional and avocational archaeologists. And to this day, that relationship is very, very strong in our state, as is in many other states. There are a few states where you have professional organizations only for professional members, and then an archaeological society that contains both. But in most places that I've noted in my brief survey, both are joined together. Professional and avocational individuals are part of the same membership and collaborate and cooperate and work together, present papers together, do research together. And so to me, that's really the cauldron of cooperation. And I think the future of this kind of relationship lies more in those avocational archaeological, professional archaeological, state archaeological societies than anywhere else moving forward. Let's see, there are states, I think every state in the Union has an archaeological society that contains members of both avocational and professional professionals. There are meetings, annual meetings, there are field schools, there are awards and grants, there are newsletters, there are bulletins. It's most of the societies are immensely active. And what's interesting is that most societies do not just consist of one single central chapter, but there are states such as Texas, California, Florida, North Carolina have multiple chapters. Really, almost all of them that I've seen have multiple chapters scattered throughout the state, each basically drawn together because of that love of archaeology. And many of them have 50, 60 members, some of them have 100 members. Statewide, larger cities have thousands of members. And really, when you look at the demographics of archaeologists, the bulk of the archaeologists out there who are doing avocational work or professional work reside in these avocational societies. And so when it comes to speaking with a voice to legislators or speaking in favor of certain heritage programs or preservation of resources, we as archaeological society members have an amazingly strong voice that we can move forward with and influence legislatures, influence the politics of what of preservation and of archaeology moving forward. So I think it's an extremely gratifying and extremely positive set of organizations and that move forward. And I think it bodes well for the future of archaeology as we move forward. So just a quick note about the rectangular artifact at the top of the page. It is actually a gunflint. Again, lithic technology moved from arrow points and scrapers to the production of gunflints as Spanish missions were opened in Texas. And many of those gunflints were manufactured by Native Americans for the Spanish soldiers who often didn't know how to make them, but they relied also on native labor to make gunflints. And their gunflints are one of the most common artifacts in Spanish colonial archaeological sites in the state. Okay, overachievers. We talked about Fridson and we talked about Esther Davis. There are just as many modern overachievers, if you will, modern contributors to archaeology today that are avocational, that again come from this strong belief in the field. Today, those individuals are rewarded through the Crabtree Award. Don Crabtree really being sort of one of the sort of spearheads of what it means and how to become a valuable contributor to archaeology, even as an avocational individual. He was a premier flint knapper. I was interested in flint napping as a young whippersnapper, in my 20s. And one of the first books that I read was his book on blades, Mesoamerican blades, which eventually led me to help a graduate student analyze prismatic blades from South Mesoamerica. And ever since then, that became my Bible, and became my whole interest in lithic analysis over the years. And in the true fashion of Don Crabtree's tradition of being a lithicist, some of the individuals that were named or awarded the Crabtree Award are lithics experts. Gene Titmus from the West Coast, J.B. Solberger from Texas, and Bob Patton, who each in their own contributed immensely to our understanding of lithic technology. And not just superficially, but, spending hours and hours and years sort of replicating and figuring out how different steps in the production of certain artifacts proceeded and ended up where it is, manufacture failures, all of those things that we understand today about technology of tool making really derive from a lot of the experimentation. And these three individuals, Gene and JB and Bob, really were sort of the epitome of what it was to dwell into, go down that rabbit hole and find out about the details of technology. The artifacts you see on top are drills and perforators and drills. These are Toya phase cultural material, which is late prehistoric, just before the appearance of missions. But what's interesting is that the same folks that made these artifacts continue making them in the missions themselves, as they do the ceramics that we see in our in mission sites, bone tempered ceramics. And so these artifacts, the ceramics, some of the projectile points, the Toya Perdiz points, as well as these drills, allow us to build a continuity between populations prior to mission period and the populations that came in or came into the missions and to reside in the missions. So again, it's telling us a really neat story about continuity and change in people's lives. Okay, modern day overachievers also include the dirt archaeologist, Jim Warnica, who I've heard of because of my interest in Blackwater Draw, received his Crabtree Award in '63. He was a consummate dirt archaeologist. He dug all over the United States. He was well known over the United States for his great technique, method, and recognition of patterns in the dirt. He received the Archaeologist of the United States Award in '63 and was awarded the Crabtree Award in 2018. Marion Merkel of the Grand County Archaeological Society, and in your neck of the woods, you guys, is again another person who's just been immensely influential in the field, has spent more than 20 years volunteering at field schools, I believe in New Mexico, has promoted the stewardship of archaeological sites, established a center for the interpretation of memories archaeology. You know, it's just immensely important stuff. And for an individual to love the field and to be so dedicated to do that kind of stuff, you know, it doesn't occur every day. And so people like that come along once in a generation, and we need to recognize and remember that that's the case, and we need to honor them and tell their story, because you don't find them every day, for sure. Now, when we come to today, there are sort of new ways and new possibilities in archaeological collaboration between professional and avocational members. What has happened in the 60s is the new legislature that came about for the Archaeological and Historical Preservation Act, and subsequently the Cultural Resource Management. Subsequently, as a result, CRM firms sprung up all over the place, Texas included, and the CRM population consisted of master's degree people, PhD people who didn't want to follow the sort of academic track, and they formed another nucleus, if you will, of highly trained, highly educated professionals that were moving into these fields. But because these fields were also the fields that were part of the state archaeological societies, they now were a younger generation of archaeologists that were just as used to working with the avocational membership as before. And they were participating in the same annual meetings, going to field schools in the same, summer field schools to get trained and to share their training and expertise with the avocational societies. And in Texas, for instance, you can an archaeological field school for an avocational the Texas Archaeological Society can have a field school only if a professional archaeologist, PhD or master's degree person pulls the permit for the excavations. It's a THC, Texas Historical Commission directed enterprise, and as a result, you basically, the society and the individual who pulls the permit is responsible for delivering a technical report that meets the standards of the Council of Texas Archaeologists. And so built into this relationship between professional and avocational archaeologists in the state is this hook, this glue that holds the two together, in that you can have archaeological field schools, but you have to collaborate with professional archaeologists, or professional archaeologists have to collaborate with you, and together as a group, you excavate and you report on that archaeological site, processing the archaeological materials, analyzing the archaeological materials, and writing up a technical report. And so it's a wonderful, necessary kind of relationship that's important to keep in mind. And I think there are many other states where the relationship works the same way. The other thing that's interesting is that as a result of archaeological investigations becoming more and more expensive, labor costs go up, CRM firms, are not cheap and inexpensive to work with. They do quality work, exceptionally good quality work, but archaeology is not a cheap enterprise. And as a result, you see a number of state agencies that are trying to develop these hybrid relationships, if you will, between archaeologists and archaeological firms and avocational societies, to try to reduce costs or keep a lid on costs by bringing in avocational societies into the mix and allowing them to do some archaeological work, surveys, for instance, some analyses of archaeological collections, just to keep costs down. Recently, I had seen a job post, not a job, or RFP, a request for proposals, from one of the state agencies in Austin, basically encouraging CRM firms to use as much as possible avocational archaeologists to complete portion of a survey, and to complete the screening of this huge quantity of bag dirt derived from an archaeological site. And again, that's driven by costs, but it is important to realize that even state agencies that are responsible and responsive for maintaining the heritage of the state are willing to open doors for that kind of collaboration. The artifacts on the bottom are end scrapers. These are end scrapers that are smaller than those that were made about 1,500 years before this period. These are about 600, 700, 800 years old. They were used in hide processing of deer hides. The earlier ones that are late Archaic in age are much, much larger than that. The technology of making them is the exact same thing as it is on this case, but they are just simply different in size compared to the bison hunting and bison hide preparing end scrapers that we see across the state. Now, in terms of collaborations that I've been part of, and I've seen state agencies and CRM firms, for instance, implement on archaeological projects, on paid archaeological projects. They range from metal detecting, because archaeologists typically shy away from metal detectors being part of their toolkits, but there are so many sort of avocational metal detecting clubs across the state that they have the expertise, they have the toolkit, and the experience on how to do systematic metal detecting. And when it comes to metal detecting to identify battle sites, for instance, we rely heavily on those groups that have that kind of training, because they can do the job much faster, much more reliably, and have the toolkit and the experience to how to use it compared to what we do. Similarly, again, there are sites where the deposits are very, very churned, but they're very rich in artifacts. And some archaeological or some state agencies have decided to backfill those, put 15, 20 feet of back dirt on top of these deposits. Other state agencies have actually allowed the removal of those deposits onto protected agency land, and allowed avocational archaeologists to come in and screen those deposits to draw out the artifact collections, which are then saved and used for educational purposes or for museum exhibits for regional museums that are close to the sites that the materials come from. And everybody benefits from that. There's a great deal of value and educational value in that, as well as some of these collections pull out materials that have never been seen in the state before. There's always value in having large quantities of artifacts from inhabited sites. And so you wouldn't get that if you were limiting to your archaeological excavations to a couple of one-by-ones in an archaeological site. These artifacts at the top are columella shells and shell beads. Again, come from the coast of Texas, from archaeological collections made by private individuals really in the 40s and 50s. Those sites no longer exist. Development as well as storms have washed away many of the sand dunes from which these sites come from. So the record that we have is really what the archaeological collections are from the 40s are. And I will take just 2 more minutes and then I will shut up, I promise. So talking briefly about challenges, we have the new context, these new doors are opening for archaeologists to collaborate with each other. There are also challenges with archaeological societies and themselves with these new opportunities. One of them is that while we all love to dig archaeological sites, and what most of the membership wants to do, digging archaeological sites comes with the obligation to write those reports up, as I mentioned, because they're all permitted projects. And sometimes those collections are very, very large, and processing them is very time consuming. And the artifacts have to be housed temporarily and permanently at a curation facility. And then several members have to gather once every week or once every month to process those artifacts, to sort those artifacts, wash those artifacts. And while many people show up at the excavation sites, much fewer people show up at the lab on a monthly basis. And so that's one of those challenges of finding enough help, finding enough people who have the time, who can be brought together to do the processing, to aid in the obligation of those agencies and the societies to write up the technical reports. The other challenge is, of course, paying for the curation space that eventually it will take to house those collections. The archaeological societies do not have those kinds of means. Curation space is running out across the country in most places, and curation is costly, especially when you're excavating rich archaeological sites. And so many times the budget of archaeological societies allows very little for the production of the report, let alone for the curation of those artifact collections. So that's something that I think over years we need to come to terms with and figure out ways in which we can handle. The other element that is important too is that, as you saw early in the presentation, many of the names unfortunately had dates in parentheses, meaning that they've passed away. Many of the current membership in the Texas Archaeological Society is very, very old. I know that one of the saddest presentations that happens at each Texas Archaeological Society annual meeting, is when Alton Pruitt stands up and reads the names of the individuals who have passed away and no longer at the meeting from the year before. And that reminds all of us that we're all knocking on the door, we're all old. And so we need to find ways in which we can draw the younger generation into the societies, because they are the ones that will have to pick up the mantle and carry it forward. And I'm sure people in the 40s and 50s and 60s were complaining about the same things. And so the fact that we're still here today tells me that, yeah, the seeds are there and they're growing, and there will be people replacing those that are no longer with us. But it is something to keep in mind, that there is that challenge to keep the membership going And finally, let's see. Basically, I covered this in terms of curation costs, in terms of processing of artifact collections. The beads that you see down below are bone beads manufactured by indigenous populations along the Rio Grande, the border between Mexico and Texas. And they are bone beads that show up in protohistoric sites as well as in mission sites. And so again, they allow us to draw that continuity picture between the prehistoric population and historic mission populations. So with that, I will, as promised, I will shut up. Just about 7 minutes over. So I will turn it back over to Fran and to Jay, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was very interesting, and it is such an important topic, I think, for us to be thinking about. We do have a few questions, but I want to start with one first for you.
Sure.
Our Archaeological has never done field schools for avocationalists. Is that something that other societies are doing, and how does that work?
Yeah, very good question. And Texas has a good tradition, and because I'm most familiar with it, I will use it as an example. The state requires any excavations to occur under a permit that is not on private land, but because the Texas Archaeological Society wants to maintain a respectful position towards antiquities and towards archaeology, we try to use the same practices as professional archaeologists do. And so the society agrees to hold a field school, and then we look around to find a principal investigator, somebody with an MA or a PhD who is willing to pull the permit for those excavations. And by virtue of that permit, then they will be responsible for writing a technical report, just as if it was a technical report written by a CRM firm for the state of Texas, for the Texas Historical Commission. And so, you know, typically it's 200, 300, 400, 500 people that show up. It's a 2-week enterprise. Really, the last one just finished last week. It went on for 10 days. You know, the artifacts that are collected, and there's a mix of a population, which is really fun. There's actually a kids section of archaeologists. One of my best friends handles it and has been handling it for years. Kids love it. You kind of give a little, and you know what the potential and you know, limitations of that archaeological collection are. So you sort of choose a spot that you know, choose spots wisely. But some of the experienced archaeologists that are avocational archaeologists, yeah, they can outcompete and know the dirt much better than most recent graduate students and undergraduate students. And so you kind of, you know, look at the capacity of the membership, but they're, you know, people that are adults, mostly retired, mostly avocationals, because they're the ones that have dreamt to be in a field school but never had a chance because they had a day job, but now they have a chance, and so they show up in droves. And there's a camp cook. You know, their evenings are full of lectures, which it's just a dynamic place, and just very, very enjoyable. And you get to see people and know people outside of their normal professions, you know, in a more relaxed environment. And it, you know, it just opens your eyes that, well, this is Dr. So-and-so. He's a real person, you know, instead of being a lecturer and an intimidating, SOB or something. And so it's really an enjoyable environment to be part of. But the key is that relationship to the Texas Historical Commission and the need to produce a technical report at the end. And it may take, you know, it may take years. In some instances, years have passed by. The PI has passed by, even passed on, and then the society looks around and hires a current archaeologist to take the notes and take the collections of artifacts from 1963 field school and write up the field school, and then that will basically complete the permit requirement for that field school. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you
You
so
bet.
much. So I have a couple of questions about getting younger people involved in membership. Do you know of examples of societies around the country who have attracted new members who are younger than many of the current members? As you said, even our memberships are getting older, and how do we attract them?
Yeah, I think that's something I've thought about quite a bit. And I think one of the ways to do that is there's a lack of training, if you will, in formal university context. Most of the training for archaeologists happens in field schools and at the universities. And those field schools may be offered once every 2 years. If you're lucky, sometimes once every 3 years, depending on the availability of the faculty, which means that you could have an undergraduate student get through a bachelor's program without ever taking a field school. And you can even see where master's degree students will have a hard time finding that slot when the field school is taught if they've already committed to 16 or 15 hours a semester. And so one of the things that I think would really work well, because there are avocational individuals that are really highly trained, and field schools themselves are run by professional archaeologists. The PI is a professional archaeologist, the permit holder. I think we could do something where, at least from an archaeological perspective, we could have something similar to a field school training session, which is 2 weeks that would happen during the associations or societies field school that would at least give you an initial certificate. And then that would potentially serve as a springboard for the next level, which is going into CRM work and trying to attain the rest of the experience in CRM firms. Some firms are more open than not, and circumstances also depend on how available and the labor pool is to allow limited trained individuals to come into a CRM program and learn additional training. But I think between the two, using the archaeological associations, societies as the first step, and then building onto that with CRM firms to strengthen that training they receive, I think that would be a possibility. The other is to simply carve out a 1 month field school, if you will, or some repeated sets of training that include both field experience and analytical experience by avocational societies, by archaeology societies, and basically fill the gap which is now exists in terms of what the universities offer. And I think that would potentially compete with the universities, but perhaps it would wake them up that there is a need that they need to fill. And if they don't fill it, somebody else will.
Great. There is a comment on here that from someone that says, we attended the TAS Field School as a family, and it was an amazing experience. So that tells
Fantastic.
me, yeah, that tells me adults and children too, most likely, right?
So that's great. Yeah, it's a family experience. You bring your children, and they will find something for them to do, and they will take care of them. So you do your own thing as an adult, and the children's club basically does their own thing under somebody else's supervision, and they learn a lot from each other. It's just it's great and rewarding to hear that.
Great, that's great. Also, is there anything one can do to help preserve the archaeological sites? There are many people who are passionate about this, but maybe not doing the right thing. What can you say about that?
Yeah. Jay, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do.
Jump in.
The best way to preserve archaeological sites is get involved with your local archaeological society, be it either the state society or your local chapter, because within these chapters are wonderful contacts such as state archaeologists, local working CRM professionals, state museum professionals, who, if you're serious about preserving something, you feel a need to have attention. These are the people who can get action on that. Also, there are numerous nonprofits throughout the U.S. whose sole mission is to preserve archaeological sites. Getting involved with them, signing up for their newsletter, finding out what makes them tick. Those are the best ways that a non-professional can support preservation of archaeology sites. Also, advocate. SAA has a wonderful advocacy program for site preservation.
Yeah.
Encourage you to get involved with us at the SAA, where we have a platform in place for every state in the US, as well as all the provinces of Canada, that advocates for site protection.
Yeah. And you know, the education is amazing. You know, in Texas, we've had individuals who were looting archaeological sites on state property being turned in by anonymous individuals who knew them, because those individuals have learned the importance of preserving archaeological sites and learned the fact that it's more important to learn about the artifacts in situ rather than in somebody else's frame. And so it's amazing that those examples to us really tell us that some of the teaching, some of the preaching that we do actually sticks, and people realize, you know, that we learn so much more by digging something up professionally or finding it in context and analyzing it in context rather than having it dug up by the bulldozer. And so it's just you know, we have to keep doing it. You know, it's not going to stick with everybody, but a lot of people walk away learning from it.
All right. So this is a little bit on the same path. So in the past, this is about some things that have happened in the past. And this person says, my father-in-law was a lifelong avid point collector. But of course, there's no documentation, et cetera, of where they came from. We have boxes and boxes of things that he collected. What should we do with them? And are they of any value with so little provenience?
Okay. One of my passions is lithic analysis and projectile point analysis in particular. And the neat thing about projectile points is that they possess form and shape, but they also carry with them a time frame. In other words, most projectile point types are known, their time limits, sort of when they began and when they ended being manufactured, whether it's 300 years or 1500 years, is pretty well known. And so you're not losing all of the information that you would lose from, for instance, a piece of bone that's dug up from a midden, because the bone, unless you date it, has no sort of temporal hook. With projectile points, you do have that temporal hook. And the important thing is, for instance, with projectile points, they do educate you about how the change in hunting technology occurred over time. The projectile point is the equivalent of a bullet. So if you think of what can you learn from a bullet, if you were to take a bullet from the Civil War era and compare it to a bullet fired out of an AR-14 today, they would be very, very different. And they would tell you quite a bit about the history of how one got from the technology, got from point A to point B. And similarly with projectile points, you know, early projectile points were large and heavy because they were hunting bison, you know, with it. Later ones were much smaller because they needed lightweight projectiles on which the projectile points were installed on. That gained them speed and velocity at the loss of momentum. All sorts of technical things like that really sort of are behind that shape and morphology that tell you about sort of the hidden elements of that lithic technology, about projectile point technology, about bows and arrows, darts. And so those are not invaluable. And I think the worst thing that could happen is to throw them out. The next best thing I think to do is to find a local or a regional museum or repository that is willing to take collections like that. You know, there might be some tax value to that, depending on, you know, the state laws of the particular state you're in. But I think donations like that, at a minimum, help students learn about technologies and projectile point typologies. And for some researchers, they might be invaluable learning tools and research tools for writing papers and contributing to the field of archaeology. And I know that many families will keep those collections for generations and generations. Sometimes the families will split them up, and half of them go to Missouri, and the other half go to Mexico, and the other half go to who knows where. And then you really have lost any hope of trying to figure out what you're dealing with. But at least if you as a family member know roughly where your grandfather collected, you can put a circle around that and say, okay, these materials come from here, and then anything else that would not fit that, for instance, a piece of obsidian that one of the points is made out of, you can say, well, that's not from here. It's got to be from somewhere else. And you start piecing together some of the story, even with the limited information that you would have.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would really, if at all possible, recommend that you donate or find some institution that is willing to take those. And again, maybe even talk them into some kind of tax breaks or some recognition that your family collection, went to that institution. I think they would be more than happy to do that in return for having that kind of a collection.
Yeah, I have something to add to that too. My family had some similar situation, and we contacted the tribal members of that area, and they are taking the collection.
Oh, fantastic.
They have some museum capacity as well, but I think whatever they do with it, it's their material. So that's another thing. If you can't find someone else, I know our museum has a hard time taking in those collections because they have so much. So anyway, okay.
That's an excellent suggestion. You bet.
Let me see if there's anything else here. Do you have any differences that you know of between societies in the East and the West? Is there anything you want to talk about related to that as far as how these societies function?
I wish I knew enough of the nuts and bolts to be able to answer that in any detail. The one thing that I suspect and seem to know is that sort of the relationship, the foundation of the relationship between professional and avocational archaeologists depends on the history of the faculty that first was part of the Department of Anthropology or Archaeology. Emot Davis, for instance, Esther Davis's older brother, when he came in the state, he was very wide open to the collaboration, and he encouraged us as budding archaeologists to visit the artifact collectors immediately as soon as we knew that we had a project that we were doing in such and such a county. He said, go visit the guy who has the framed points on his mantle. And there was nothing wrong about that, because they knew the collections, they knew the regions, they knew the sites better than we did. And so we learned from them. On the other hand, if you were looking at archaeologists who didn't come out of that tradition, and there were more sort of academically driven archaeologists without that collector background, then that kind of relationship never forged or wasn't encouraged as much. Now, I don't know how that plays out east to west, but I know that, for instance, in Arkansas and in Indiana and Illinois, some of the societies there are some of the earliest to publish bulletins and newsletters with pictures of artifacts collected by, avocational individuals. And, I've used them to do analyses based on those photographs and images. And so there is that tradition going into the Midwest, I think, of this kind of collaboration that we see in Texas. Jay, what's your sense about West?
No, there, I am unmuted. I am sorry. I'm monitoring the chat at the same time. Yeah, there isn't an archaeological society that I haven't met their representatives that just isn't full of wonderful ideas about how to engage public and do more public outreach. Most of I find between East and West societies, we're all kind of the same. We're all facing the same problems. We're all facing the same challenges. We're also facing the same successes. several standouts, as I mentioned in the chat, are Arkansas. They just finished up their field school and training session. Oh my goodness, the diversity of ages and interest and activities is just amazing. North Carolina is very active, especially with a focus on younger generations, to try to get them encouraged. Saskatchewan is just a poster child for how to be overly inclusive and bring everyone in that they can and have something for everyone's interest. So everyone is trying, everyone is doing their best. And I applaud all the societies, Archaeologists and everything that Archaeologists does and has done for all the years that I've been familiar with the organization. Everyone does an excellent job and should be commended for it. And we just got to keep pushing the message. And to me, that's the most important thing, is don't let the message get stale. Keep pushing it.
Great. I do see a message in the chat as well from Janet Lloyd, who says, we accept limited local collections to use in the lab methods class and displays. So there you go. That's a place like you were talking about, Steve, that especially some of those points or even pottery that could be diagnostic could be used. All right. Well, thank you so much to both of you for this important lecture. We really appreciate it. And thank you everyone who joined us this evening. Jay did put some references in the chat. So if you haven't looked at that, take a second and copy those if you're interested. And anything else you guys want to have?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I'm up all hours of the day and night and work all the time. And so if anybody has any questions or any other information that they would like to know about the Texas Archaeological Society, or just our thoughts about how to move forward, by all means, we're all here to learn from each other. And so shoot us an email, send us your ideas. We'll be happy to reply. And who knows, we'll all learn from something new that we can apply to our own societies in our own region. So again, I really strongly believe that the future of this kind of collaboration moving forward is in these archaeological societies. The bulk of the population is there. When you're talking about, any individual state, you're talking about thousands of individuals, avocational individuals that are members of these societies. Just imagine the power of speaking with one voice, when we have to advocate for something and we want to change rules and legislation. So keep loving archaeology and keep being involved, keep advocating for it, because that's how we got to move forward and 150 years from now, somebody will be doing this again, talking about how much success we've had in the last 150 years. So good luck to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And to those of you out there, you will receive a follow-up email through Zoom that has our email address on it. And if you do have other questions or other discussion you'd like to have with Jay or Steve, you can send that through us and we will forward it to them. So thank you and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.